Sloane flourished her new country club card like a crown jewel while our parents applauded as if she had cured a disease. I just touched the heavy, embossed envelope inside my purse. It was not a guest pass, but a royal invitation addressed directly to me. She had no idea that to secure her plastic trophy, her husband signed a shady deal that was one file flip away from shattering her high society dreams like a dropped mimosa glass. My name is Wendy Rodriguez, and if there is one thing I have learned in 36 years of navigating the Bennett family dynamic, it is that silence is not just golden, it is a weapon. We were seated at the best table on the patio of the Potomac Crest Country Club, a sprawling expanse of manicured emerald grass and colonial architecture just outside of Dike Chaussee. The air smelled of freshly cut hydrangeas and old money. Around us, the Sunday brunch crowd was in full swing, a symphony of heavy silverware clinking against fine china and the low, confident hum of people who make policy decisions before their morning coffee. It was the kind of place where the waiters knew your name but you never bothered to learn theirs, and where membership was less about playing golf and more about proving you had survived the social gauntlet of the Capitol. My sister, Sloane Hawley, was currently the conductor of our little family orchestra. She sat across from me, her posture rigid with triumph. Holding a thin rectangle of plastic as if it were a holy relic she had personally excavated from an ancient tomb. It was her new membership card. She did not just hold it, she performed with it. She twirled it slowly between her fingers, which were manicured to a lethal point, and painted a shade of nude pink that probably cost more than my first car. She tilted her hand just so, catching the late morning sunlight, so that the gold embossing of her name flared comfortably against the white linen tablecloth. "It feels heavier than I thought it would," Sloane said, her voice breathless, feigning surprise. "Miles, honey, look at the font. It is so dignified." My mother, Elaine Bennett, pressed a napkin to the corner of her eye, looking for all the world like she was witnessing a baptism or a wedding rather than the acquisition of access to a heated pool and an overpriced buffet. Her eyes were shimmering with genuine tears. "Finally," Mom whispered, reaching out to touch Sloane's wrist, careful not to obscure the card. "We are finally in. Do you know how long your father and I dreamed of this Potomac Crest is not just a club, it is an institution. We have arrived. Sloane, you have truly arrived." My father, Thomas Bennett, was beaming. He looked at Sloane, and then he looked at Miles, Sloane's husband, with the sort of reverence usually reserved for war heroes or winning quarterbacks. He raised his mimosa high, the orange juice pulpy and bright in the crystal flute. "To Miles," Dad boomed, his voice carrying just enough to make sure the neighboring tables knew we were celebrating a victory. "For making it happen. You said you would get us past the wait list, and by God, you did it. A toast to the man of the hour." Miles Hawley sat back in his chair, soaking in the adoration like a lizard on a warm rock. He was 37, handsome in a way that felt purchased rather than genetic, with teeth that were too white and a suit that fit a little too perfectly. He offered a practiced, modest shrug that did not reach his eyes. "It was nothing, Thomas," Miles said, clinking his glass against my father's. "I just made a few calls, called in a few favors. When you operate at a certain level, people are happy to open doors for you. Besides, Sloane belongs here. You all do." He did not look at me when he said, "You all." I sat quietly at the edge of the table. Sipping my water, I had ordered orange juice, but I had lost the taste for it the moment the card came out. To them, I was barely there. I was Wendy Rodriguez, the daughter who kept her ex-husband's last name because it was the only thing I owned that felt entirely mine. I was the artsy one, the one who ran a nonprofit, the one who they assumed needed a free meal because my work did not come with stock options or a summer house in the Hamptons. "The amenities are incredible," Sloane continued, finally setting the card down on the table but positioning it so it faced outward, toward the rest of the patio. "But honestly, it is the access to the social calendar that matters. You know the Spring Sovereign Gala is in 3 weeks. the table went silent. The Spring Sovereign Gala was not just a party. In DC circles, it was the event where the political, financial, and old guard elite converged to pretend they cared about a cause while aggressively securing their alliances for the next fiscal year. It was notoriously difficult to get into. 3 weeks, Mom repeated, her eyes widening. Oh, Sloan, do you think, is it too late to get tickets? Sloan laughed. A tinkling, condescending sound that grated against my nerves like sandpaper. Mom, you do not just get tickets to the Sovereign Gala. It is strictly members only, and even then, it is tiered. But Miles has already secured a platinum table. We are going to be right near the podium. Incredible, Dad breathed. That is the top tier. It is, Miles agreed, cutting into his eggs, Benedict with surgical precision. It is where the real decisions happen. The ambassador is going to be there, 2 senators, the CEO of Ardent Tech. It is a room for people who shape the future. Sloan leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the intoxication of exclusivity. It is going to be a vetting ground. They are extremely picky this year. They are keeping the guest list tight to ensure the quality of the network remains pristine. No hangers-on, no aspirants, just the established elite. She paused, and then her gaze slid over to me. It was a look I knew well. It was the look she gave me when she wanted to remind me of my place in the hierarchy without technically saying anything mean. It was a pitying look, a look that said, I love you, but you are not one of us. Wendy, she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. You should probably stop by the house that weekend anyway. I will need help with the flower arrangements for the pre-party I'm hosting. Since you will not be attending the gala, it would give you something to do. I set my glass down on the coaster. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. The gala sounds lovely. Sloan, what is the theme this year? Educational impact and global outreach, Sloan said, reciting the words as if they were a brand of perfume. It is about the future of learning, very high-level stuff, strategy, policy, infrastructure. She took a sip of her drink and offered me a tight smile. Honestly, Wendy, it is probably for the best that you are not going. You would feel so out of place. I know you love your little project, that Harbor Lane thing you do. But this is, well, this is macro level. These people are talking about billions of dollars in funding. It is not really the place for grassroots stories. It can be very intimidating if you are not used to that scale. My little project. Harbor Lane Learning Alliance operated in 14 countries. We had just secured a partnership with the Ministry of Education in 3 separate nations to overhaul their rural digital literacy curriculum. My team consisted of 200 people. Last year, our direct impact reporting showed we improved literacy rates for over 50,000 children, but to the Bennetts, I was just Wendy who taught poor kids to read. I was the charity case, the one who did good work that was cute but not serious. Serious work was what Miles did, moving imaginary money from one column to another and skimming a percentage off the top. I am sure I would manage, I said, keeping my voice even. Oh, sweetie, be realistic, Mom chimed in, patting my hand. Sloan is just trying to protect you. You know how you get in these big crowds. You hate dressing up. And honestly, the conversations would go right over your head. Miles says the buy-in for a table is $25,000. It is a different world. A world where people are judged by what they can bring to the table, Miles added, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. The Sovereign Gala is for players. Wendy, no offense. It is for people who can write the checks, not the ones asking for them. I felt the weight of my purse sitting on the floor beside my chair. Inside the main pocket, tucked safely into the inner lining, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It had arrived yesterday via private courier. The paper was heavy, cotton fiber stock. The return address was embossed in gold leaf. It did not invite me to buy a ticket. It did not ask me to sponsor a table. It was a formal request from the board of directors of the Spring Sovereign Gala. asking me to attend as a keynote speaker and honoree. And below that, inside the fold, was a smaller card, a card that Sloane and Miles would kill to see. Royal invitation, private reception. It was an invitation to the pre-gala reception hosted by the visiting royals who were patrons of the educational initiative. A room so exclusive that even the platinum table members like Miles would never see the inside of it unless they were serving the drinks. I looked at Sloane. She was beaming at her husband, secure in her belief that she had climbed the mountain. She thought the world was made of plastic cards and country club gates. She thought she was looking down on me from a great height. "You are right," I said quietly. "It sounds like a very specific crowd." "Exactly," Sloane said, pleased that I had conceded. "But do not worry. I will take plenty of pictures so you can see what it looked like. Maybe I can even bring you back a favor bag if they have extras. Sometimes they give out really nice candles." "That would be nice. Sloane, thank you." I took a bite of my dry toast. The silence at the table returned to a comfortable hum as they went back to discussing which designers Sloane should wear. They talked about perception. They talked about status. They talked about how good they were going to look walking through those doors. I watched them, and a strange, cold calm settled over me. It was not anger. I was past anger. It was the feeling of a chess player who sees checkmate 10 moves before their opponent even realizes the game has started. They were so loud in their victory. They were celebrating a membership that Miles had likely leveraged something dangerous to get. I knew Miles's finances were not as pristine as he pretended. I knew the rumors in the industry about his liquidity. And I knew that people like Miles did not get jumped to the front of a 10-year wait list at Potomac Crest without promising something they could not deliver. Sloane held up her card again, catching the light one last time. "To the good life," she said, winking at me. I smiled back. It was a genuine smile, though they misread the reason for it. "To the good life," I repeated. I reached down and rested my hand on my bag, feeling the outline of the heavy envelope through the leather. They were celebrating a piece of plastic that let them sit at a table. They had no idea that I was holding the key to the entire building. They were feasting on the illusion of power. They were so busy congratulating themselves on getting into the room that they did not realize the person they were mocking was the one standing at the podium. I took a sip of water and let the cold liquid wash away the taste of their condescension. Let them have their brunch. Let them have their toast. Let Sloane shine her little card in the sun, because Wendy Rodriguez was done begging for a seat at their table. I thought about the seal on the envelope in my bag. I thought about the text inviting me to a private audience before the doors even opened to the general membership. They were celebrating a card, but I was holding a door. I kept the name Rodriguez as a souvenir. My marriage to Marco had ended 5 years ago, a casualty of two people growing in opposite directions, but the divorce was amicable. We split the books and the furniture, hugged in the parking lot of the courthouse, and went our separate ways. I kept his last name not because I was pining for him, but because it felt like a shield. Being Wendy Rodriguez meant I was a woman with a history, a woman who had built a life outside the suffocating orbit of the Bennett household. It was a declaration of independence stamped on my driver's license, to my family. However, the name was just an embarrassing clerical error I had refused to correct. Whenever my mother introduced me to her friends at the racket club or the charity luncheons she dragged me to, she would lower her voice and say, "And this is our Wendy, Wendy Bennett." If I corrected her, she would laugh a breathless, fragile little laugh and wave her hand as if shooing away a fly. She would tell me later that she was just trying to protect me. She would say that using my maiden name made me sound fresh, whereas Rodriguez made me sound like damaged goods. But I knew the truth. They wanted me to be a Bennett, because a Bennett belonged to them. A Bennett could be controlled. A Bennett was an extension of Thomas and Elaine's vanity project. For 36 years, I had been the supporting actor in the movie of their lives. The starring role, naturally, had gone to Sloane. It was not entirely Sloane's fault that she was the golden child. She had been bred for it like a prize show dog. She was taller than me, blonde where I was dark, and possessed an uncanny ability to agree with people in a way that made them feel brilliant. But her real ascent to divinity happened when she married Miles. In my parents' eyes, Miles Hawley was not just a son-in-law, he was a winning lottery ticket. He worked in high-frequency trading, or perhaps it was private equity. The explanation changed depending on who Miles was trying to impress, and he spoke with the rhythmic cadence of a TED Talk speaker. He used words like synergy and vertical integration at the dinner table. He leased luxury cars that he swapped out every 12 months. He was the son my father never had, and the social anchor my mother had always craved. In this ecosystem, my life was treated as a quaint, slightly pitiable subplot. I ran the Harbor Lane Learning Alliance. To the industry, we were a formidable force in international education development. I managed a budget of $12 million a year. I negotiated with foreign governments to standardize coding curriculums in developing nations. I had a team of analysts, field directors, and lobbyists who looked to me for leadership. I had built Harbor Lane from a chaotic startup in a basement to a global operation recognized by the United Nations. To my family, however, I was running a teaching project. The minimization was so consistent it almost felt choreographed. I remembered a dinner last Thanksgiving vividly. It was the sort of memory that stuck in my throat like a fishbone. I had just returned from Geneva, where I had closed a partnership with a major tech conglomerate. They were pledging $4 million over 3 years to our infrastructure fund. It was the biggest win of my career up to that point. I was vibrating with the need to share it, to show them that I was building something real. We were sitting around the mahogany dining table, the air heavy with the scent of roasted sage and expensive red wine. I waited for a lull in the conversation. "I have some big news," I had said, smiling. "Harbor Lane just signed with Ardent Tech. They are funding the entire pilot program in Southeast Asia. It means we can double our reach by next January." My father looked up from his turkey, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. "That is nice, Wendy. Good for you. Keeping busy is important." "It is more than keeping busy, Dad," I pressed, feeling that familiar desperation rising in my chest. "This is a multi-million-dollar contract. It puts us on the map globally. The CEO flew in specifically to meet with me." "That is wonderful, sweetie," my mother said, but her eyes were already drifting to the window. "Oh, look at that. The neighbor's landscaping lights are on already. Thomas, did you call the contractor about the patio extension? Miles was saying we need to get the stone imported from Italy if we want it to look authentic." "Right," Dad said, turning immediately to Miles. "Miles, what was the name of that supplier you used for the summer house, the one with the marble?" And just like that, my $4 million victory was bulldozed by a patio. I sat there, stunned, watching them discuss stone textures and shipping logistics for 20 minutes. Sloan reached over and patted my hand, offering me a look that was equal parts pity and dismissal. "It is great that you are so passionate, Wendy," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Really, it is sweet, but you have to be realistic. Nonprofits are volatile. Miles says the market is shifting. You should not get your hopes up too high. We just want you to be safe." That was their favorite weapon, fake concern. They wrapped their condescension in layers of worry, so that if I got angry, I would look like the ungrateful daughter. They treated my career as a whimsical phase, something I would eventually grow out of when I found a real husband who could support me. They could not conceive of a world where I was the power player. In their minds, power looked like Miles's shiny suits and Sloane's platinum cards. Power did not look like me, in my practical blazers. Taking calls at 2 a.m. to coordinate relief supplies, I used to fight it. I used to bring printed annual reports to Sunday dinners. I used to mention the awards I had won. But about 2 years ago, something inside me shifted. It was not a snap. It was a slow hardening. I realized that begging for their validation was like trying to pay for groceries with monopoly money. It had no value because they did not understand the currency, so I stopped. I built a wall of silence. When they asked how work was, I said fine. When they asked if I was seeing anyone, I said, not really. I stopped correcting them when they called my organization a charity. I stopped trying to explain the difference between revenue and donations. I let them believe I was the struggling, artsy sister who needed their guidance. I focused entirely on the work. I built systems. I hired brilliant people. I let the results speak to the people who actually mattered. And what I found was that the silence gave me an advantage. While Sloan and Miles were busy curating their image, broadcasting every minor social victory on social media, I was operating in the shadows, making moves that they could not even comprehend. I learned that people who are obsessed with status are terrified of the truth. They build their lives on perception. They need the world to believe they are rich, happy, and important. Because if the audience looks away, the show ends. They fear the reality of who they are when the lights go down. I, on the other hand, dealt in nothing but reality. My work required brutal honesty about resources, logistics, and impact. I did not have the luxury of pretending. And that brought me to the notification that had just vibrated against my leg under the brunch table. While Sloan was preening over her country club membership, my phone had silently received an email confirmation that would have stopped my father's heart. I did not look at it at the table, but I knew what it said because I had been expecting it. It was from the Office of Protocol for the Royal Delegation. I had spent the last 6 months vetting this relationship. The visiting royals were not just figureheads. They were deeply invested in educational reform. They had read my white papers. They had requested a private briefing on my methodology. The email in my inbox was the final itinerary for a meeting that was scheduled to take place 45 minutes before the Spring Sovereign Gala began. It was not just a meeting, it was a private audience. The subject line would have read, "Confirmation of private audience, Her Royal Highness and Ms. Wendy Rodriguez." If I showed that screen to my mother, she would probably faint. If I showed it to Miles, he would choke on his mimosa. They would not believe it. They would think it was a prank, or a mistake, or that I was merely a secretary taking notes for someone else. They could not reconcile their version of Wendy the struggling teacher with a woman who discussed policy with princesses. So I did not show them. I let the phone sit dark in my bag. I listened to Sloan talk about the dress code for the gala, about how she needed to find something that said old money, but still looked fresh. I listened to Dad brag about Miles's golf handicap. I let them paint their little picture of the world, a picture where they were the masters of the universe and I was the spectator. They had no idea that the script had already been rewritten. They were actors in a play that I was now directing. Sloan leaned back, satisfied with her performance. "You know," she said, eyeing my plain blouse, "if you want, I can go through my closet and find some old things for you. You really need to update your wardrobe. Wendy, even for your work, presentation matters." "Thanks, Sloan," I said, my voice steady. "I will keep that in mind." I thought about the bespoke evening gown currently hanging in a garment bag at the back of my closet, ordered specifically for the gala. I thought about the speech I had already drafted, the one that would address 500 of the most powerful people in the country. I took a bite of my melon, tasting the sweetness. The secret felt heavy and warm in my chest. They wanted me to be small. They needed me to be small so they could feel big. But I was done shrinking. I was just waiting for the curtain to rise. The waiter had just cleared the appetizer plates, leaving behind a silence that Sloan felt compelled to fill with more of her philosophy on social hierarchy. She was leaning forward, her elbows resting on the table, her eyes bright with the fervor of a convert preaching a new religion. "You have to understand," Sloan said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial register that suggested she was sharing state secrets. "The Spring Sovereign Gala isn't just a party. Mom, it is a filter. It is the one night of the year where the city decides who actually matters. You have the people who are in the room, and then you have everyone else. It is where they decide who is worth respecting." She said the word respecting with a sharp final click of her tongue, as if respect were a commodity that could be audited and assigned based on seating arrangements. My father nodded solemnly, absorbing this wisdom. "It makes sense. Elite circles have to maintain their standards." "Exactly," Miles added, swirling the remnants of his drink. It is about proximity to power. If you are not visible, you are invisible. Simple as that. I set my glass down on the coaster. The sound was soft, a dull thud against the cork, but it felt loud in my own ears. The condensation on the glass was cold against my palm. I looked at Sloane, really looked at her. I saw the insecurity beneath the heavy makeup, the desperate need to believe that her value was tied to the invitations she received. For years, I had let her have this. I had let her build her castle out of playing cards because it was easier than blowing it down, but she had just defined the terms of engagement. Who is worth respecting? I agree, I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the humidity of the brunch chatter. They all turned to look at me, surprised I was speaking at all. Usually, by this point in the meal, I had faded into the background like the wallpaper. I think it is going to be a fascinating night, I continued, keeping my eyes on Sloane. I am looking forward to it. I have an invitation to the gala as well. For a heartbeat. The only sound was the distant thwack of a tennis ball being hit on the courts below. Then, Sloane laughed. It was not a mean laugh, necessarily. It was the laugh of someone who hears a toddler claim they can fly. It was dismissive, incredulous, and steeped in absolute certainty. "Oh, Wendy," she said, shaking her head, her earrings catching the light. "That is sweet, but I think you are confused. I haven't sent out my guest invites yet. Each member table gets 2 discretionary guest spots. But Miles and I haven't decided who we are taking. We have a lot of clients to consider." She looked at Mom and Dad with a can-you-believe-her expression. She thinks because I mentioned the gala, she is automatically coming with us. I am not talking about your table, Sloane, I said. I reached into my bag. My movements were slow, deliberate. I bypassed the heavy cream envelope that was for later, if needed, and instead pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and navigated to the email I had received 48 hours ago. The brightness of the screen seemed to cut through the shade of the patio umbrella. "I am talking about my own invitation," I said. I slid the phone across the white linen tablecloth. It stopped directly in front of Sloane, face up. "Impossible," Sloane said, the smile still plastered on her face, though the edges were starting to tremble. "You cannot just buy a ticket, Wendy. I told you, it is vetted. You have to be sponsored. Just read it," I said. Sloane looked down. She adjusted her posture, preparing to point out my mistake, to explain that this was probably a donation receipt or a newsletter subscription. I watched her eyes scan the header. Subject official keynote speaker itinerary and honoree credentials, Spring Sovereign Gala. The smile slid off her face like wet clay. She blinked, once, twice, as if trying to reset the image before her. She leaned in closer, her manicured finger hovering over the glass, but not daring to touch it. She read the first paragraph, then the second. Her skin, usually flushed with the heat of the day and the alcohol, began to take on the color of old parchment. "Speaker," she whispered. The word came out choked, as if she had swallowed an ice cube. "Keep reading," I said. She scrolled down. I knew exactly what she was looking at. It was the section highlighted in a deep, formal crimson box at the center of the email. It was the part that superseded every membership tier, every platinum table, and every sponsorship deal Miles had leveraged. Royal invitation, private reception, security clearance, level 1 required, access code, WR. Alpha 7. The table was silent. My parents were looking back and forth between us, sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure but not understanding the cause. "Sloane?" Mom asked, her voice wavering. "What is it? Did she get a ticket?" Sloane did not answer. She looked like she had been struck by a physical blow. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, searching for the trick. She was looking for the punchline, the moment where I would admit I had photoshopped it to mess with her. But there was no punchline. Miles, sensing the collapse of his wife's composure, reached over and snatched the phone from the table. His movements were jerky, aggressive. "Let me see that," he snapped. It is probably a spam email. There are a lot of phishing scams targeting the gala this year. He held the phone up. Squinting at the text, he was looking for a pixelated logo, a misspelled word, anything that would allow him to dismiss this and restore the natural order of the universe. Instead, he found the digital signature of the Royal Protocol Office. This. Miles stopped. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. This says she is an honoree. What does that mean? Dad asked, putting his fork down. Is that good? Miles looked at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating shock. He knew the hierarchy of these events better than anyone. He knew that member was high, sponsor was higher, but honoree was the stratosphere. It means she is not just attending, Miles said, his voice flat. It means she is part of the program, and this, he pointed to the red box on the screen, his finger trembling slightly. This bit here, the private reception, this is strictly limited. This is for the diplomatic corps, the royal delegation, and high-level benefactors. We do not even have access to this room. Sloan let out a small, strangled noise. But that is for important people. The words hung in the air, naked and ugly. That is for people who are changing the world, Miles corrected. Though he looked like the words tasted like vinegar, or people who have donated $10 million or more, I took a sip of my water, enjoying the cool slide of it down my throat. I did not donate $10 million, I said. Then how? Sloan demanded. Her voice was rising now, cracking with panic. How did you get this? Who did you sleep with? Who did you bribe? This makes no sense. Wendy, you run a little teaching charity. It is not a charity, I said, correcting her for the first time in years. And it is not little. The theme of the gala this year is the future of education. The committee did not want another banker or real estate tycoon giving a speech about schools they have never set foot in. They wanted someone who is actually doing the work. I leaned forward, mirroring the posture she had held only moments ago. They vetted Harbor Lane for 6 months, I said. They audited our financials. They interviewed our field partners in 3 continents. They invited me because while you were busy trying to buy your way into the room, I was busy building something worth talking about. Sloan looked at the phone, which Miles was still holding as if it were a live grenade. She looked at the words, Royal Invitation. But, she stammered, but I told everyone. She stopped herself. But it was too late. The sentence was already out, dangling like a loose thread on a sweater. You told everyone what? I asked softly. Sloan looked down at her hands. Her perfectly painted nails were digging into the white tablecloth. She looked small. For all her posturing, for all her talk of power and respect, she looked incredibly small. I told everyone you just work with kids, she whispered. Her voice was thin, barely audible over the chatter of the brunch crowd. I told the committee members, I told the other wives, that you were struggling, that you ran a small daycare program for underprivileged children. I made it sound cute, my mother gasped. Sloan? I had to. Sloan snapped, her head snapping up, tears of frustration pricking her eyes. I could not have them thinking you were. Competition Miles and I are the power couple. That is the brand. We are the successful ones. If you are some international educational leader, then what am I? I am just the wife who plans parties. Miles flinched. That hit him, too. I looked at my sister. I saw the fear behind the cruelty. She had spent her entire life building a pedestal so she could look down on me, and she was terrified of what would happen if we stood eye to eye. You tried to bury me, I said. You minimized my work, my career, and my life to everyone we know. You turned me into a charity case so you could feel superior. I was helping you, Sloan cried, though the conviction was gone. I was lowering expectations so you would not be embarrassed. No, I said. I reached out and took my phone back from Miles. He let it go without a fight. I wiped the screen on my napkin, removing his fingerprint. "You did not do it to protect me," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You said that so you could always be the winner at the table." I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that my father flinched. I put the phone back in my bag. "I am going to the restroom," I said. "Enjoy the rest of your brunch. And Miles, you might want to check the fine print on that membership agreement. I hear the committee is very particular about who they let into the inner circle this year." I walked away before they could respond. I did not look back, but I could feel the silence at their table radiating outward. Colder than the ice in their glasses, they were sitting in the ruins of the narrative they had written. And for the first time, they did not know what to say. The silence that followed my revelation was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum, sucking the air out of the patio. My mother, Elaine, was the first to break it. Though her contribution only served to twist the knife deeper into the wound she did not even realize she was inflicting. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes, her eyebrows knit together in genuine confusion. "But, Wendy," she asked, her voice trembling slightly, "how does the organizing committee even know who you are?" It was a simple question. On the surface, it sounded harmless, but underneath, it carried the weight of 30 years of neglect. It stripped me bare. It revealed, in a single sentence, that my own mother could not conceive of a world where I was visible without her or Sloane pointing a flashlight at me. She assumed that because she did not pay attention to my life, no one else did either. She assumed that because I was not a topic of conversation at her bridge club. I did not exist in the public sphere. I took a slow breath. Centering myself, I refused to let her see the blood. "They know me because I do business with them." "Mom," I said calmly, "Harbor Lane isn't a hobby. We run the Rural Connectivity Initiative in partnership with Ardent Tech. We deployed 4,000 tablet units to off-grid classrooms in the last fiscal year alone. We built the global educator network that trains 1,200 teachers a month." I kept my tone even, reciting the facts like items on a grocery list. I did not boast. I did not raise my voice. I simply laid out the architecture of my career, brick by brick. "The committee is honoring the impact of that work," I continued. "They are interested in the fact that we secured $6 million in federal grants to expand the program into South America. They know me because my name is on the contracts, not just the guest list." Sloane made a sharp, dismissive sound in her throat. She shifted in her chair, her body language agitated. She looked like a cornered animal, darting her eyes around the table to see if the neighboring diners were witnessing her humiliation. "Okay, fine," Sloane snapped, dropping the pretense of sweetness. "So, you have some work contacts. That is great, Wendy, really, but you have to see how this looks." She leaned forward, her hands clasping together in a pleading gesture that felt more like a demand. "This is my year, Wendy," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Miles and I have spent 2 years positioning ourselves for this. We bought the table. We sponsored the golf tournament. We did everything right. If you show up there, walking around like you own the place, it confuses the narrative." "The narrative?" I asked. "Yes, the narrative," Sloane hissed. "The story is that Miles is the heavyweight. I am the socialite. You are the sister, the one we help. If you walk in there and get treated like royalty, it makes us look like we don't know our own family. It makes Miles look like he isn't the most important person at his own table." She reached out, her fingers grazing my wrist. Her skin was cold. "Honey, listen to me," she said, switching tactics to a patronizing negotiation. "Why don't you just decline? You can tell them you have a conflict. A work trip, anything. If you do that, I promise I will make it up to you. We can go on a spa trip next month, just the two of us. My treat. I will buy you that bag you liked. Just let me have this moment, please." I stared at her hand on my wrist. She was trying to bribe me. She was trying to buy my absence with a facial and a handbag, as if my career achievements were just a toy I could trade for a piece of candy. Before I could answer, My father cleared his throat. He set his drink down with a heavy thud, his face flushed with the righteous indignation of a patriarch who feels his control slipping. "Your sister is making a valid point, Wendy," Dad said, his voice stern. "Family is important. We stick together. We support each other's successes. Right now, this gala is Sloane's success. It is her debut into this circle. You coming in and muddying the waters. It is selfish." "Selfish," I repeated, looking at him. "Dad, I am being honored. I am giving a speech. You think it is selfish of me to accept a professional accolade because it might bruise Sloane's ego. It is not about ego," Dad argued, though his eyes shifted away from mine. "It is about order. It is about not embarrassing your sister. Imagine how it will look if you are up there on stage and she is just sitting in the audience. People will ask questions. They will ask why she isn't the one up there. It puts undue pressure on her. You know Sloane gets anxious." I looked around the table. I looked at my mother, who was nodding in agreement with my father. I looked at Sloane, who was watching me with expectant, wet eyes. And finally, I saw it, the absolute, unvarnished truth. They were not afraid I would be hurt by the high-pressure environment of the gala. They were not worried I would be out of place or uncomfortable. They were terrified that I would shine. They were terrified that if I stood in the light, I would cast a shadow over Sloane. And in this family, Sloane was the sun. Nothing was allowed to eclipse her. My role was to be the dark matter, the invisible force that held her orbit in place but never showed its face, while this emotional blackmail was unfolding. Miles had been silent, but it was an active silence. He had pulled his phone out again. But this time, he was not looking for gala tickets. His thumb was scrolling rapidly. His brow was furrowed, his jaw tight. He was fact-checking me. "Wait a minute," Miles muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. Sloane turned to him, desperate for backup. "Tell her, Miles, tell her she needs to step back." Miles did not look up. "Wendy," he said, his voice strange. It lacked its usual arrogance. It sounded hollow. "I am looking at a press release from last month, from the Department of Education." "Yes," I said. "The expansion grant. It says here." Miles paused, reading the text as if it were written in a foreign language. "It says the Harbor Lane Alliance was selected as the primary vendor for the digital literacy pilot. It lists the operating budget for the project at $22 million. He looked up at me then. His face was pale. The mimosa flush had drained away completely. $22 million, he repeated. "Is that accurate?" "For the first phase, yes," I said casually. "If we hit our benchmarks by Q3, the second tranche unlocks another $15 million. Miles looked like he had just been slapped. He worked in finance. He understood numbers. He understood that managing a portfolio of nearly $40 million in government contracts put me in a completely different weight class than he had ever imagined. He realized, in that moment, that while he was moving numbers around on spreadsheets to earn a commission, I was moving actual capital to build infrastructure. "And here," Miles continued, scrolling down, his voice getting quieter, "there is an article in the Global Development Journal. It calls you the quiet architect of modern education reform." Sloane snatched the phone from his hand. She stared at the screen, her eyes darting across the words. She saw my picture, a professional headshot, confident and serious embedded in the article. She saw the graphs. She saw the quotes from industry leaders praising my vision. For a second, I thought she might acknowledge it. I thought she might say, "Wow, I had no idea." But I had underestimated the power of denial. Sloane shoved the phone back at Miles as if it were contaminated. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving her hand frantically. "Miles, you cannot believe everything you read on the internet. Anyone can pay for a press release these days. I bet she wrote that article herself." She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "That is it, isn't it? You paid some PR agency to puff up your resume so you could get this invite? It is all smoke and mirrors. Sloan, I said. The Department of Education does not publish paid puff pieces. Or maybe it is a mistake, Sloan interrupted, her voice rising in pitch. She was grasping at straws, desperate to find a reality where I remained beneath her. Yes, that has to be it. It is a clerical error. There is probably another Wendy Rodriguez, a famous one, and they mixed up the emails. It happens all the time. She looked around the table, seeking validation for this new theory. Doesn't that make more sense? Why would they invite Wendy to a royal reception? It is obviously a mix-up. Identity theft. Maybe someone is using your name. Wendy, you should be careful. You could be in legal trouble if you show up and pretend to be this other person. Sloan is right, Mom chimed in, eager to latch onto an explanation that restored the status quo. It does sound very dangerous. Wendy, if you go there, and it turns out they are expecting someone else, oh, the humiliation, you would be escorted out by security. We cannot let that happen to you. We are protecting you, Dad added, nodding sagely. If you go and it is a mistake, you will look like a fool. Better to just email them now and clarify. Tell them you are not the person they are looking for. I looked at them. I looked at the three of them, weaving a tapestry of delusion right there at the brunch table. They were so threatened by my success that they would rather believe I was the victim of identity theft or a clerical error than accept that I was accomplished. But then I saw the look in Miles's eyes. He was not nodding. He was not agreeing with Sloane's frantic theory about a mix-up. He was looking at me with a cold, calculating intensity. He knew the numbers were real. He knew the invite was real. And more importantly, he knew that if I walked into that room as an honoree, I would have access to people he was desperate to meet. He also knew that if I spoke to those people, and if they asked me about my brother-in-law, Miles Hawley, I could destroy him with a single sentence. Sloan was panicking, but Miles was plotting. You know, Miles said slowly. Sloan might have a point about the confusion, even if it is real. Wendy, there are protocols. If there is any question about your background or your vetting, the committee might pull the invite at the last minute to avoid scandal. There it was, the threat. He was not suggesting it might happen. He was suggesting he could make it happen. He was implying that he could make a few calls, whisper a few lies about my stability or my finances, and have the committee reconsider. He was signaling that he was willing to burn my reputation to save his wife's big night. They are very strict about background checks, Miles continued, his eyes locking with mine. One anonymous tip about, say, inflated credentials or financial irregularities, and they rescind the invite immediately, just to be safe. It would be a shame if that happened. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was not fear. It was clarity. They were not going to stop at the table. They were not going to leave this at brunch. Sloane's jealousy and Miles's self-preservation instinct had combined into a dangerous cocktail. They were going to try to take this away from me. I did not argue. I did not scream. I did not try to convince them of my legitimacy. There was no point in showing my hand to people who were planning to steal the cards. You gave me a lot to think about, I said, my voice neutral. I certainly do not want to cause a scene. Sloane exhaled, her shoulders dropping. She thought she had won. She thought she had bullied me into submission. Exactly. We just want what is best for everyone. I am going to head out, I said, standing up and gathering my purse. I have some work to catch up on. Good idea, Dad said, cutting into his steak with renewed gusto. Keep your head down. Focus on the basics. I walked away from the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. I kept my pace steady until I was around the corner, out of their sight line. Then, I pulled out my phone. I did not call my mother. I did not call a friend to cry. I opened my secure messaging app and typed a message to my executive assistant, David. He was a former paralegal with a mind like a steel trap. To David. Subject urgent credential verification. Prepare the full verification dossier for the Sovereign Gala Committee. Audit reports, tax filings, partner affidavits, and the letter of recommendation from the ministry. Have it digitized and ready to send on my signal. I paused, and then added one more line. Also, flag any incoming inquiries to the office regarding my tenure or background. Do not answer them. Trace the source. Someone is going to play dirty. I hit send. They wanted a war. They wanted to use their social influence to crush me, but they had forgotten one thing. Miles played checkers with favors and handshakes. I played chess with international compliance laws and federal contracts. If they wanted to question my credentials, I would make sure the answer was loud enough to shatter their glass house. The phone call came exactly 48 hours after brunch. I was sitting in my office at Harbor Lane, staring at a heat map of our digital literacy rollout in rural Brazil. The office was quiet, the kind of productive hum that I usually found soothing. The afternoon sun was cutting across my desk, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. When my cell phone vibrated, the screen lit up with a number I did not recognize, but the area code was local to the district. I answered on the second ring. This is Wendy Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez, a man's voice said. It was smooth, professional, but possessed a coolness that raised the hair on the back of my arms. This is Julian Vance. I am the director of protocol for the Spring Sovereign Gala. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. Julian Vance was the gatekeeper. He was the man who decided who walked the red carpet and who got turned away at the security checkpoint. Mr. Vance, I said, keeping my voice steady, it is a pleasure. I assume this is regarding the logistics for the reception. There was a pause. It was a fraction of a second too long. In a manner of speaking, he said, Ms. Rodriguez, we operate with a very high degree of discretion and integrity at the Sovereign Gala. Our vetting process is rigorous. However, we received a communication this morning, an anonymous formal complaint. I stopped breathing for a moment. I swiveled my chair away from the window, turning my back on the view of the city. What kind of complaint? I asked. It concerns the veracity of your credentials, Vance said. He was choosing his words with the care of a man walking through a minefield. The complaint alleges that the data provided regarding Harbor Lane's impact has been significantly inflated. Specifically, it suggests that the partnership with Ardent Tech is overstated, and that your invitation was secured under false pretenses based on these exaggerations. He did not accuse me. He did not say he believed it, but the fact that he was calling meant the seed of doubt had been planted. In the world of high-stakes diplomacy and philanthropy, the truth often mattered less than the perception of propriety. If I looked like a risk, I was out. I see, I said. My voice was ice. Did this anonymous source provide any evidence? They provided a narrative, Vance said. They suggested that a background check would reveal discrepancies. Ms. Rodriguez, you understand that given the royal presence, we cannot afford even a whisper of impropriety. If there is any doubt about the legitimacy of our honorees, we are obligated to pause their clearance. Pause. That was the polite word for cancel. I knew exactly who had made the call. The phrasing was too specific, inflated, overstated, false pretenses. These were the exact arguments Sloane had spit at me over her half-eaten eggs Benedict. And the timing, 2 days gave them just enough time to panic, stew in their jealousy, and decide that destroying my reputation was a fair price to pay to protect their social standing. Mr. Vance, I said, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I understand you have a protocol to follow. However, Harbor Lane does not operate on narratives. We operate on audits. I pulled my keyboard closer. I am sending you an email right now, I said, typing as I spoke. It contains a link to a secure data room. Inside, you will find our last 3 years of independent financial audits conducted by Deloitte. You will find a notarized affidavit from the CEO of Ardent Tech confirming the $22 million scope of our partnership. You will also find a direct letter of commendation from the Ministry of Education, stamped and verified yesterday. I hit send. The sound of the key pressing down felt like a gavel striking wood. I am also including the contact information for our legal counsel, I added. If the committee requires further verification, He is available to walk you through our federal compliance filings. We are a transparent organization. Mr. Vance, we have nothing to hide. I heard the soft click of a mouse on his end. Silence stretched over the line for 10 seconds, then 20. I have received the file, Vance said. His tone had shifted. The coolness was replaced by a respectful efficiency. I see the Deloitte seal. And the ardent letter. Is there anything else, Mr. Vance? I asked. No, he said, and I could hear the tension leaving his voice. This documentation is overwhelming. It appears the complaint was unfounded. I apologize for the disturbance. Ms. Rodriguez, we have to treat every flag seriously, but this clearly closes the matter. Thank you, Julian, I said. I look forward to the evening. I hung up and set the phone down. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. They had actually done it. I had suspected they might try to talk me out of it, or perhaps create a scene at the family house. But this was a calculated strike. Reporting me to the committee was an attempt to murder my career. If Vance had been less thorough, or if I had been less prepared, that call could have ended with my name being blacklisted from every major philanthropic board in the country. Miles and Sloan were not just annoying relatives anymore, they were hostiles. I picked up my water bottle and took a long drink. I needed to think. This was not a random attack. It was precise. They knew exactly where to hit to cause the most damage. They targeted my integrity because they knew that was the currency of the gala. My office door opened, and David, my executive assistant, walked in. He looked pale. David was a man who typically thrived on chaos, but today he looked rattled. "Wendy," he said, closing the door behind him. "We have a problem." "I know," I said. "I just got off the phone with Julian Vance, the anonymous tip." David shook his head. "No, not that. I mean, yes, that is bad. But this is something else. I just got an alert from our perimeter security monitoring." He placed a tablet on my desk. "Someone called the gala's private security firm about 20 minutes ago," David said. "They did not go through the protocol office. They went straight to the tactical team." The caller claimed to be a concerned family member, trying to verify if the person claiming to be Wendy Rodriguez was actually who she said she was. They used the phrase, "potential imposter risk." I stared at the tablet. This was a different beast entirely. The call to Vance was about my resume. A call to the security team was about physical safety. By using the word imposter, they were trying to trigger a red flag that would strip my security clearance. In the world of royal protection, you do not take chances with imposters. You detain them. You ban them. "They are trying to get me flagged as a security threat," I whispered. "It gets worse," David said. "The caller tried to use a family emergency override to get the details of your itinerary. They wanted to know exactly when you were arriving and which entrance you would be using. Security shut them down, obviously, but they logged the attempt." I leaned back in my chair. Miles. This had Miles's fingerprints all over it. Sloan was petty, but she was not tactical. Sloan would complain about my dress. Miles was the one who knew how to work a system. He knew that if he could create enough noise around my name, the Secret Service or the Royal Guard would simply cut me from the list to avoid the headache. He was not just trying to uninvite me, he was trying to erase me. "Do we know the number?" I asked. "It was a burner," David said. "VoIP number, untraceable by standard means." I looked at the royal invitation lying on my desk. The cream-colored envelope looked peaceful, but it was sitting in the middle of a battlefield. I thought about the QR code on the invite. It was encrypted. It was linked to my biometrics. They could not fake the invite, so they were trying to break the person holding it. "Okay," I said. I stood up and walked to the window. "David, I want you to lock down my bio. No one changes a comma without my direct authorization, and tell the team to ignore any media inquiries. If anyone calls asking for a comment on allegations, tell them to speak to our lawyer." "What are you going to do?" David asked. "I'm going to stop playing defense," I said. I picked up my phone again. I scrolled past my mother's name. I scrolled past Sloan. I stopped at a name I had not called in 6 months, but whom I trusted with my life. Marcus Thorne. Marcus was not just a lawyer. He was a forensic investigator who specialized in corporate espionage and reputation management. We had worked together when a corrupt contractor tried to sue Harbor Lane 2 years ago. Marcus had buried him under a mountain of his own emails. I hit dial. "Wendy," Marcus answered on the first ring. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Please tell me you are not being sued again." "Worse," I said. "I am being sabotaged, and I need you to trace a ghost." I explained everything: the brunch, the threats, the call to Julian Vance, the call to the security team. I gave him the timestamps. I told him about the VoIP number. "I need to know who made those calls." "Marcus," I said. "I know in my gut it is my brother-in-law, Miles Hawley, but I need proof. I need something that links that burner number to him. If he used a decent VoIP service, it is hard," Marcus warned. "But if he was arrogant, and guys like this usually are, he might have made the call from a device connected to a known Wi-Fi network, like his home or his club." "He is arrogant," I confirmed. "He thinks he is untouchable." "Give me 24 hours, Marcus said. "If he left a digital footprint, I will find it." The next 24 hours were a blur of work and tension. I focused on my speech. I refined the talking points for the royal audience. I forced myself to eat, to sleep, to function. All while a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I was not afraid of Miles, but I was sickened by him. The realization that my family would go to these lengths, not just to ignore me, but to actively dismantle me, was a grief I had not expected to feel. I was in the middle of reviewing a grant proposal when Marcus called back. It was late. The office was dark. "I have it," Marcus said. His voice was low, serious. "Was it him?" I asked. "It was him," Marcus said. "But Wendy, that is not the headline. You were right about the Wi-Fi. He routed the call through the guest network at the Potomac Crest Country Club. Amateur mistake. I matched the device ID to his personal cell phone." "So we have him," I said, relieved. "We can prove malicious intent." "We can," Marcus said, "but you need to listen to me." While I was digging into the device history to verify the ID, I found something else. I found a series of emails he sent from that same device regarding the gala sponsorship. "Okay," I said. "He bought a table. I know that." "No," Marcus said. "He didn't just buy a table. Wendy, he made a pledge, a massive one, to secure his membership and the gala tickets. He signed a promissory note to the gala's charitable endowment." "How much?" I asked. $500,000. Marcus said. My jaw dropped. Miles did not have $500,000 to give away. He lived on credit and bonuses. "He does not have that kind of money," I said. "I know," Marcus replied, "and neither does he. But here's the kicker. He pledged it under the name of a foundation, the Hawley Bennett Family Trust. Does that trust exist?" "No," I said. "Absolutely not." "Well, he created paperwork for it," Marcus said. "But the assets he listed as collateral, they are not his. He listed the projected future value of a property listed at your parents' address. The room spun. He had leveraged my parents' home. He had invented a trust. And he had promised money he did not have, using assets he did not own, just to get a country club membership and a table at a party." "Wendy," Marcus whispered, "this isn't just jealousy. If you go to that gala and anyone looks too closely at the Hawley Bennett family because of your presence, his entire house of cards falls down. He's trying to get you kicked out because he is terrified that you are the loose thread that unravels his fraud." I sat in the darkness. The phone pressed to my ear. It all made sense. The desperation, the panic, the insistence that I stay away. It wasn't just about Sloan being the star. It was about survival. Miles had gambled everything on this illusion of wealth, and he had dragged my parents into it without them even knowing. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Send me the file." "What are you going to do?" he asked. I am going to let him think he won, I said, and then I am going to make sure the truth arrives at the exact right moment. I hung up. The game had changed. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation anymore. I was holding the file that could collapse his entire facade with a single review, and in 3 weeks, at the Spring Sovereign Gala, I was going to decide whether or not to let it explode. The file Marcus sent me was not just a smoking gun, it was a fully loaded cannon pointed directly at the structural integrity of my family. I sat at my dining room table, the surface covered in printouts, looking at the anatomy of a lie. It was fascinating in a morbid way. Miles Hawley had not just told a fib to get a table. He had constructed a labyrinth of financial smoke and mirrors that was sophisticated enough to fool a country club membership committee but fragile enough to collapse under a single audit. The centerpiece of his scheme was the entity named the Hawley Bennett Family Trust. At first glance, the name sounded distinguished. It sounded established. It sounded like old money. But as I dug into the state registration documents Marcus had pulled, I realized exactly what Miles was doing. There was a very famous, very real philanthropic organization in D.C. called the Bennett Global Foundation. They funded hospitals and libraries. By naming his shell entity, the Hawley Bennett Family Trust, Miles was engaging in a tactic known as passing off. He was banking on the fact that the membership committee at Potomac Crest would see the name Bennett, see the word global, and assume he was connected to that dynasty of wealth. He was counterfeiting prestige. I looked at the registration date of the trust. It was created 4 weeks ago. It was a baby, a prop, a cardboard cutout of a bank vault. But the real horror was in the pledge document he had submitted to the gala committee, to bypass the 10-year waitlist for the club. Miles had utilized a loophole often reserved for major philanthropists. If a prospective member pledged a significant donation to the club's charitable endowment, the board could vote to expedite their induction. Miles had pledged $500,000. The number stared up at me from the paper. $500,000. It was an aggressive, confident sum, but when I turned the page to the payment schedule, the confidence evaporated into legal gibberish. The pledge was not cash up front. It was structured as a deferred gift, contingent upon the maturation of trust assets scheduled for the end of the fiscal quarter, in plain English. Miles had written a check that he knew would bounce, but he had dated it for 3 months from now, hoping that by the time the club tried to cash it, he would have found a way to make the money or delay them further. And what were these trust assets he was waiting on? I pulled up the property records Marcus had flagged. Miles had listed a primary estate as the collateral for the trust's liquidity. The address was 4802 Maplewood Drive. My parents' house. My stomach turned. My parents owned their home outright. They had paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. It was their retirement, their safety net, their entire life's work. Miles had somehow listed their property as an asset of his fictional trust. He had not technically taken a lien out on it. He could not do that without their signatures. But he had represented to the club that he controlled this asset. He was using their home as bait to hook his own status. If the club found out the asset was not his, he would be sued for fraud. If he defaulted on the pledge and the club tried to collect, my parents would be dragged into a legal nightmare to prove they had nothing to do with it. He was gambling with the roof over their heads so he could drink cocktails with senators, but the rabbit hole went deeper. I turned my attention to the second stack of papers. These were emails that Marcus had scraped from the server logs, communications between Miles and a handful of his high-net-worth clients. This was where the legal realism turned into a criminal liability. The Spring Sovereign Gala had a strict policy regarding commercial solicitation. It was a sanctuary rule. You were there to support education, not to pitch your hedge fund. The invite explicitly stated that using the event for direct business development was grounds for immediate revocation of membership. I picked up an email Miles had sent to a man named Gregory Salinger, a venture capitalist with a reputation for being difficult. Subject Exclusive Access Sovereign Gala Greg. Regarding your hesitation on the Series B buy-in, I have a solution. I have secured a platinum table at the Spring Sovereign Gala next month. The CEO of Ardent Tech is the keynote sponsor. I can guarantee you FaceTime with him during the cocktail hour. We can close the loop on the deal right there. The cost of the seat is $25,000, payable to the Hawley Bennett Trust to handle the logistics. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. He was selling access. He was scalping tickets to a charity event, marking them up, and funneling the money into his fake trust, likely to pay for the very pledge he had made to get the tickets in the first place. It was a Ponzi scheme of influence. And the worst part, he was promising access to the CEO of Ardent Tech. I knew the CEO of Ardent Tech. His name was Jonathan Kress. We had coffee once a month. Jonathan hated being ambushed by salespeople. If Miles shoved a client in Jonathan's face during the gala, Jonathan would be furious, and since I was the one publicly linked to Ardent Tech through Harbor Lane, the blowback would hit me. Miles was selling a meeting he could not deliver, with a man he did not know, at an event where such behavior was strictly prohibited. He was not just risking his own reputation. He was risking mine. He was risking Harbor Lane's relationship with its biggest donor. I set the email down. My phone pinged. It was a message from David. My assistant, David. You need to hear this. I just got off the phone with the donor relations manager at the Red Cross. She is a friend. She said she bumped into Miles at a mixer last night. Me and David. She asked him about you, since she knows we are sisters. Miles told her that it was so sweet of the committee to include you. He told her that he and Sloan set up a special hardship grant through their trust to sponsor your attendance because your nonprofit is struggling to keep the lights on. He is spinning it like you are their charity case. I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. He was not just trying to get me kicked out with anonymous tips. He was simultaneously planting a backup story in case I stayed. In his version of reality, I wasn't the honoree because of my merit. I was the honoree because he, the benevolent billionaire, had paid for me to be there. He was stealing my achievement and wearing it as a cape of his own generosity. He was using my name to legitimize his fake trust. Look, the Hawley Bennett Trust supports struggling educators like my sister-in-law. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was using me as a shield to hide his sword. I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about Sloan. Did she know? Did she know her husband was leveraging our parents' house? Did she know he was selling introductions he couldn't deliver? Or was she just happy to have the card? Asking no questions, as long as the champagne kept pouring, I suspected it was the latter. Sloan preferred plausible deniability. She liked the lifestyle too much to look at the receipts. I felt a wave of profound sadness, not for me, but for them. They were so hungry. They were starving for validation, for a sense of importance, for the feeling of being in. And that hunger had made them reckless. They had forgotten the one lesson I had learned the hard way in the nonprofit world. Due diligence always comes due. I could have called my parents. I could have screamed at them to check their property deeds. I could have driven over to Sloane's house and thrown the papers in her face. But that would be emotional. That would be messy. That would give Miles a chance to spin, to lie, to say I was hysterical and jealous. He would talk his way out of it. He would say it was a misunderstanding, a placeholder, a draft. I needed to close the exits. I needed to handle this the way I handled a breach of contract with a foreign vendor. I needed to let the system do the work. I gathered the documents, the trust registration, the pledge letter with the vague payment terms, the property records proving he did not own the collateral, the email to Gregory Salinger soliciting business, and finally, the bio he was spreading about my hardship. I scanned them all into a single, encrypted PDF file. I opened my laptop and composed a new email. I typed the address of the Ethics and Membership Committee of the Potomac Crest Country Club. I copied the Director of Protocol for the gala, Julian Vance. I did not write a long, emotional diatribe. I did not use exclamation points. I wrote with the cold, hard precision of an auditor. Subject: urgent disclosure regarding membership compliance and reputational risk. Spring Sovereign Gala. To the committee. I am writing to formally request a private meeting regarding a significant compliance issue involving a new probationary member, Mr. Miles Hawley. Based on verified documentation in my possession, I believe there are material misrepresentations regarding the financial instruments used to secure his sponsorship pledge. Furthermore, I have evidence indicating that the Spring Sovereign Gala's name and access are being leveraged for unauthorized commercial solicitation. In direct violation of the event's bylaws, these actions pose a direct reputational risk to the gala, the attending royal delegation, and the corporate partners. Specifically Ardent Tech, I am not submitting this as a personal grievance, but as a duty to protect the integrity of the event where I am serving as an honoree. I have attached a preliminary index of the relevant documents. I am prepared to present the full dossier for review by your legal team. I await your immediate instruction. Sincerely, Wendy Rodriguez, CEO, Harbor Lane, Learning Alliance, Honoree, Spring Sovereign Gala. I hovered over the send button. This was the nuclear option. Once I sent this, there was no going back. The club would launch an internal investigation. They would audit Miles. They would find the fake trust. They would find the empty bank accounts. They would see the unauthorized solicitation. Miles would not just be kicked out. He would be blacklisted. His career in finance would likely be over once the fraud allegations circulated. Sloan would lose her status. My parents would be devastated to learn their golden boy was a fraud. But if I didn't send it, Miles would keep selling access to Jonathan Kress. Jonathan would find out, blame me, and cut funding to Harbor Lane. Thousands of children would lose their literacy programs. My parents' house would remain tied to a ticking time bomb of debt, and Miles would continue to use me as a prop in his con artist theater. I looked at the clock. It was just past midnight. I thought about the brunch. I thought about the way they looked at me. I thought about the anonymous tip trying to ruin my career. They had started a fire because they thought I was flammable. They forgot that I was the one who built the fire station. I pressed send. The email vanished from my outbox. The mechanism was in motion. The gears of the institution were beginning to turn. By tomorrow morning, the compliance officers at Potomac Crest would be looking at Miles Hawley not as a wealthy patron, but as a liability. I closed my laptop. The room was silent. I felt a strange sense of peace. I had not acted out of vengeance. Not really. I had acted out of clarity. I had simply put the truth back where it belonged. Now, all I had to do was wait for the collision. The fallout from my email to the committee was almost instantaneous. Though the explosion happened behind closed doors before it spilled into my parents' living room, I had been summoned. That was the only word for it. My mother had called me at 7 a.m, her voice shrill and tight, demanding I come over before work because there was a family emergency. When I arrived, there was no ambulance in the driveway, only Miles's leased luxury sedan parked haphazardly on the grass, as if he had arrived in a blind panic. I walked into the house to find a tribunal. My parents were seated on the beige sofa, looking like they were attending a funeral. Miles was pacing by the fireplace, his usually perfect suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened, and Sloan was standing in the center of the room, vibrating with a mixture of terror and rage. As soon as I closed the front door, Sloan lunged toward me. "What did you say to them?" she demanded. Her voice was not a scream. It was a desperate, breathless rasp. "The committee contacted Miles's office this morning. They said there is a compliance hold on our application. They are asking for additional documentation regarding the trust. They mentioned a formal inquiry. What did you tell them?" Wendy. She was pleading and threatening all at once. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her makeup hastily applied. She looked like a woman who had woken up to find the ground beneath her house had turned to water. I placed my bag on the entryway table and walked into the living room. I did not sit down. I wanted the advantage of height. "I told them the truth," I said calmly. "I told them that I would not be intimidated by anonymous threats regarding my career, and I told them that if they were concerned about integrity, they should look at the entire roster of new applicants, not just the honorees." "You reported us," Miles said. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His face was gray. You actually reported your own family to the ethics board. I reported a security risk, I corrected him. Someone tried to have my security clearance revoked. Miles, someone tried to tell the Royal Protection Team that I was an imposter. That is not a prank. That is a federal offense. I simply gave the committee the context they needed to understand where those attacks were coming from. My mother let out a sob, pressing a tissue to her nose. Wendy, how could you— People are going to talk. If this gets out, if people know there is an investigation, the shame of it, why do you always have to make things so big? I looked at her, and for the first time, the hurt didn't land. It just bounced off the armor I had built over the last 3 days. Mom, I said, someone tried to destroy my professional reputation. I built Harbor Lane from nothing. I have a duty to my employees and my partners. You are worried about gossip at the bridge club. I am worried about legal liability. We are not playing the same game. You are so selfish, Dad snapped. He was gripping the armrest of the sofa so hard his knuckles were white. You always complicate things. Why couldn't you just let it go? So Miles made a few calls, so Sloan got a little competitive. That is what families do. We fight, and then we move on. We do not call the authorities. This isn't a fight over the last piece of pie. Dad, I said, Miles leveraged your house. The room went dead silent. My father blinked. What? I didn't, Miles interjected quickly, his voice jumping an octave. Thomas, don't listen to her. She is hysterical. She is twisting things. He listed this address, I said, pointing to the floor beneath my feet. As the primary asset for the Hawley Bennett Family Trust, he pledged $500,000 against the future value of this property. If he defaults on that pledge, and the club decides to litigate, they will come for this house. My father looked at Miles. The blind adoration that usually filled his eyes was replaced by a flicker of terrifying clarity. He looked at his son-in-law and saw, perhaps for the first time, the sweat on his brow and the tremor in his hands. Miles, Dad said slowly. Is that true? It is a technicality, Miles stammered. It is just paperwork. Thomas, I was going to move the assets around before the quarter ended. The house was never actually at risk. It was just a placeholder to get us past the velvet rope. My mother looked like she was going to faint. The realization that their golden boy had gambled their sanctuary for a country club membership was too much for her to process. She just sat there, shaking her head. Can we speak outside? Miles asked me. His voice had shifted. The panic was tamped down, replaced by his closer persona, the voice he used when he was trying to sell a bad deal to a gullible client. Just for a minute, Wendy, professional to professional. I nodded. Fine. We walked out onto the back patio. The glass door clicked shut behind us, muffling the sounds of my mother's weeping. The morning air was crisp. Miles walked to the edge of the stone railing and looked out at the garden my father had tended for 20 years. Look, Miles said. Turning to me, he put his hands in his pockets, trying to look relaxed. I underestimated you. I admit that. You played a hard hand. But we can fix this. We can still fix this. There is no we, Miles, I said. There is, he insisted. The committee hasn't made a final ruling yet. They are in the discovery phase. If you withdraw your complaint, if you send a follow-up email saying it was a misunderstanding, or that you were given bad information, the investigation goes away. I can smooth over the rest. He took a step closer. And in return, he said, lowering his voice, I will make it worth your while. I know Harbor Lane is always looking for corporate sponsors. I can get my firm to commit to a donation. $20,000, maybe $30,000, tax deductible, no strings attached. We call it a family scholarship. You get the money, I keep my membership. Sloan gets her gala night, everyone wins. I stared at him. He was trying to bribe me with the same money he didn't have. He was trying to buy my integrity for the price of a mid-sized sedan. You really do not get it, I said. This isn't about money, and it isn't about me winning. Then what is it about? Miles snapped. his facade cracking. Why are you doing this? Do you hate us that much? Is this about Sloane? Are you that jealous that she married well and you are still single? I am not jealous of a woman whose husband bets her parents' house on a lie, I said. I did it for her, Miles hissed. You think I care about the country club? I hate golf. I hate the food. I did it because Sloane needs this. She needs to feel like she is at the top. If I lose this membership, if we get kicked out, it will break her. Do you want that on your conscience? Stop, I said. I looked at him, and then I looked back at the house. Sloane was standing at the glass door, watching us. She couldn't hear us, but she was watching. Her arms were wrapped around herself. You didn't do this for Sloane, I said to Miles. You did this because you need the access. You are drowning in debt. Miles, I saw the financials. You need to meet Jonathan Kress because you need a bailout, not because you want to buy him a drink. You are using Sloane as a cover, and you are using my parents as collateral. Miles opened his mouth to argue, but the truth was a physical weight between us. He closed his mouth. He looked defeated. I am not withdrawing the complaint, I said. And if you try to contact my donors again, I will file a restraining order. That is the only deal on the table. I turned and walked back to the door. Sloane opened it before I could reach the handle. She stepped out, closing the door behind her so we were now 3 on the patio. She didn't look at Miles. She looked at me. He offered you money, didn't he? Sloane asked. Her voice was flat. He tried, I said. Sloane let out a short, bitter laugh. He always thinks money fixes it, or the promise of money. She looked at her husband. Miles looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Sloane, honey, Miles started. I am handling it. Shut up, Miles, she said. It was the first time I had ever heard her speak to him without adoration. She turned back to me. The anger was gone from her face, replaced by a raw, naked exhaustion. You know why I did it, she asked. Why I told everyone you were a charity case. Why I wanted you to stay away. Because you wanted to be the star, I said. No, Sloane said. She shook her head, tears spilling over her lashes. Not the star. I just wanted to be someone. She gestured to the house, to Miles, to herself. Look at me, Wendy. Who am I? I am Miles's wife. I am Mom and Dad's pretty daughter. I am the one who hosts the parties. I have never done anything. I have never built anything. You have this whole life. You have a name that people respect because of what you do, not who you married. When we are at dinner, and Miles talks over me, or Dad praises Miles for breathing, I feel invisible. She took a ragged breath. I needed you to be less, she whispered. I needed you to be the struggling one, because if you are successful, if you are the one with the royal invitation and the career and the respect, then what is left for me? If I am not the successful sister, then I am just nothing. It was a twist I hadn't seen coming. I had assumed her cruelty was born of arrogance. I realized now it was born of a profound, hollow emptiness. She had tried to push me down into a hole so she could stand on my shoulders and feel tall. Miles stood there, silent. He had no spreadsheet for this conversation. I looked at my sister. I didn't feel the urge to hug her. I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. The damage she had tried to do to me was too real, too intentional. But I did feel a shift. I wasn't fighting a monster anymore. I was fighting a ghost. Sloane, I said, my voice steady but not unkind. You can be whoever you want to be, but you cannot build your self-worth by stepping on me. I am not your ladder, and I am not your mirror. I stepped back. I am going to the gala, I said. I am going to give my speech, and I am going to accept the honor I earned. Whether you are there or not is up to the committee, but do not ever try to diminish me again to make yourself feel big. It won't work. I walked past her. I walked past Miles. I went back into the house, picked up my bag from the table, and walked out the front door. My father called my name as I left. But I didn't stop. I drove straight to my office. I needed the sanctuary of my work. I needed the clean, binary world of problems and solutions. When I sat down at my desk, my computer pinged with a new email. It was from Julian Vance. Subject: Final Itinerary Confirmation. Spring Sovereign Gala. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, following our internal review, we are pleased to confirm that your credentials have been fully verified and locked. The security concerns raised earlier have been traced and neutralized. We apologize for the undue stress this may have caused. Please find attached the updated schedule for the evening. You are confirmed for the Royal Private Reception at 1800 hours. Furthermore, per the instruction of the Royal Protocol Officer, your introduction in the program has been amended to reflect your full standing. You will be introduced as the Honorable Wendy Rodriguez, Architect of the Global Literacy Initiative. We look forward to welcoming you. I stared at the screen. The Honorable Wendy Rodriguez. It was just a title. It was just words on a screen. But after the morning I had just endured, after seeing the fragile, crumbling reality of my family's pretensions, those words felt like iron. My family was breaking apart under the weight of their own lies, but I was still standing, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in the shadows. I was standing in the center of the room. The next 3 weeks did not pass. They accelerated. It was the sensation of being in a high-speed elevator. The kind where your stomach drops, but your feet stay planted on the floor, while my family was likely scrambling in the mud of their own making. I was living in the stratosphere of logistics, diplomacy, and high-stakes preparation. I ceased to be Wendy the daughter or Wendy the sister. I became fully and completely Wendy the CEO. My calendar was a mosaic of color-coded obligations. I had 3 fittings for my gown, which was being custom-draped by a designer who usually only dressed women whose names appeared on the nightly news. There were speech drafts, 14 versions, to be exact, which I practiced in front of a mirror until the words global equity and scalable infrastructure felt like muscle memory. I had briefing calls with the Royal Protocol team, discussing everything from the correct way to address a duchess to the specific security clearance required for my handbag. It was a rhythm I knew well. It was the rhythm of work. It was clean. It was demanding. And it left absolutely no room for the Bennett family drama. Yet, they tried to insert themselves into the margins. It started with the apology tour. Though to call it an apology would be an insult to the word, it was more like a strategic realignment. My father, realizing he had bet on the wrong horse, began sending me links to articles about education reform. He clearly had not read them. One was from 4 years ago, and another was about a school district in Ohio. Not international development, but the subject line was always the same. Thinking of you. Great work. He was trying to build a bridge with toothpicks after he had burned down the forest. My mother took a different approach. She called me every other day, her voice shrill with a forced cheerfulness that grated on my nerves. She asked about my shoes. She asked if I was wearing my hair up or down. She asked if I needed to borrow her pearl earrings, the ones she had explicitly promised to Sloane for her wedding day. You know, people are really talking about the gala, Mom said during one of these calls, her tone casually probing. Everyone is so impressed that you are involved. Sloane is so proud of you. Really, she is just under a lot of pressure with Miles. You know how men get about business. I held the phone away from my ear, typing an email to my field director in Jakarta. I am sure she is. Mom. She is just worried she might be overlooked, Mom continued, the desperation leaking through. Since you have such a big role, it would be nice if you could, mention them, maybe introduce Miles to a few people. He is really trying to expand his network. I am going there to work. Mom, I said, hitting send on the email. Not to facilitate networking for Miles. Right, she stammered. But family is family. We rise together, don't we? We rise together. It was ironic coming from the woman who had watched me drown for a decade without throwing a rope. Sloane, for her part, had adopted a guerrilla warfare tactic. She couldn't attack me directly, not after the confrontation on the patio, so she went underground. I began to hear whispers from the periphery of my social circle. A friend of a board member, a former colleague who ran in the country club set, they all reported the same thing. Sloan was spinning a narrative. "I heard your sister saying you got the keynote spot because of a diversity initiative," one acquaintance told me over coffee. "She is telling people the committee was desperate for a grassroots angle this year, and you just happen to fit the demographic. She says it is a stroke of luck." "Luck?" I repeated, stirring my espresso. "Yeah, she is playing it off like she is the benevolent big sister who is so happy Wendy finally got a break. She is trying to make it sound like you won a raffle. Not a vetting process." I didn't respond. I didn't send a cease and desist. I didn't confront her. I let her talk. I knew that in the world of high-level philanthropy, results were the only currency that mattered. Sloan could whisper all she wanted in the country club locker room. On the night of the gala, I would be the one at the podium, and she would be the one holding a ticket she couldn't afford. But then, she got sloppy. It was 5 days before the event. I was in my office reviewing the final layout for the program guide when David, my assistant, walked in. He didn't knock. He looked annoyed. "You are not going to believe this," David said, dropping a printed email chain on my desk. "We just got a flag from the gala's printing vendor. They received a request to edit the digital proof of the program." I looked up. "The program is locked. Who requested an edit?" "A woman claiming to be your publicist," David said, using air quotes. "She called the vendor directly. She said there was an error in your bio. She wanted to remove the title CEO and replace it with Program Coordinator. She also wanted to cut the line about the $22 million grant, claiming it was unverified." I felt a cold smile touch my lips. "Let me guess. The call came from a blocked number." "It did," David said. "But the vendor is smart. They asked for a written confirmation. The email address she used was prharborlane-guest.com. It is a fake domain, but I ran a trace on the IP address of the sender." He tapped the paper. "It matches the IP address of the Hawley residence," he said. Sloan. She was sitting in her house, terrified that the printed program would cement my status in black and white ink, trying to demote me before the ink dried. She wanted to physically erase my title because she couldn't handle seeing it next to her name. "What do you want to do?" David asked. "Do we call a lawyer?" "No," I said. "Lock the file. Tell the vendor that any further unauthorized change attempts should be forwarded directly to the gala's fraud department. And David, make sure the font size on my title is 1 point larger than standard." I didn't have time to be angry. I had a meeting. An hour later, I was walking through the marble corridors of the Foundation House, the headquarters of the committee organizing the Sovereign Gala. I had been summoned by Julian Vance again. But this time, the tone was different. It wasn't about an anonymous tip. It was about structural integrity. I was ushered into a conference room that smelled of beeswax and old leather. Julian Vance was there, along with the gala's legal counsel and the head of the membership committee, a stern woman named Mrs. Calloway. There were no pleasantries. "Ms. Rodriguez?" Mrs. Calloway began, her hands folded on top of a thick file. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We are in the final stages of our compliance review for the event. As you know, we take the integrity of our donor base very seriously." "I am aware," I said, taking a seat. "We have a situation regarding a pledge," she said. She didn't look at me. She looked at the file. "A Mr. Miles Hawley has submitted a pledge of $500,000 to secure a platinum table and an expedited membership. He has listed the Hawley Bennett Family Trust as the funding vehicle." She paused, lifting her eyes to meet mine. "Our auditors have been unable to verify the liquidity of this trust," she said. "However, Mr. Hawley has repeatedly invoked his relationship to you, specifically your status as our honoree, as a character reference. He has implied that your organization and his trust are financially intertwined." I sat very still. Miles was using me as a human shield. He was telling them, Don't worry about the money. My sister-in-law is the keynote speaker. We are good for it. I see, I said. Ms. Rodriguez, Julian Vance said softly, we need to know. Can you vouch for the solvency of this trust? Is Harbor Lane receiving funds from it? Is this a legitimate entity? The room hung in suspended animation. This was the moment. I could lie. I could nod and say, yes, Miles is good for it, and kick the can down the road. I could save my family the embarrassment. I could protect my parents' house for another few months until the inevitable collapse. But then, I thought about the text Sloane had sent her friends about my luck. I thought about Miles soliciting business from my donors. I thought about the attempt to edit my bio. They were not asking for mercy. They were asking for complicity. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Calloway, I said, keeping my voice level. I am here as the CEO of Harbor Lane. My fiduciary duty is to my organization and to the truth. I took a breath. Harbor Lane has no financial relationship with the Hawley Bennett Family Trust. We have never received funds from it, and I have never seen an audited balance sheet for it. I operate my organization with total transparency. I cannot speak for entities I do not control. Mrs. Calloway's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. She knew exactly what I was saying. I was cutting the cord. However, I continued, leaning forward, I am also deeply invested in the success of this gala. The last thing any of us want is a scandal involving a defaulted pledge on the night of the event. It would reflect poorly on the royal delegation. Agreed, Vance said. What are you suggesting? I suggest you apply the standard risk protocol, I said. For any unverified trust, the committee should require the pledge to be fully liquidated and deposited into the gala's escrow account 48 hours before the event. No deferred payments, no I owe us, cash on hand. I looked at them. If the money is real, I said, Mr. Hawley will have no problem writing the check. If it is not, well, then you have saved the gala from a very public embarrassment. Mrs. Calloway allowed a small, razor-thin smile to appear on her face. That is a very prudent suggestion. Ms. Rodriguez, it protects everyone's interests. Exactly, I said. It protects the institution. I left the meeting 10 minutes later. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun of D.C., feeling lighter than I had in years. I hadn't destroyed Miles. I hadn't revealed his fraud. I had simply asked the universe to check his math. I had demanded that he pay the toll for the road he wanted to drive on. If he had the $500,000, he was welcome to the party. If he didn't, well, gravity would do the rest. 2 days later, the gravity hit. I was at the club, ironically, the same Potomac Crest Country Club where this all began, having a quick lunch with a potential donor who wanted to discuss a scholarship fund. We were seated near the window, a safe distance from the main social hub, but I had a clear view of the lounge. Sloane was there. She was holding court with 3 other women, looking every inch the queen bee. She was wearing a white dress that looked expensive and impractical. She was laughing, her head thrown back, likely telling a story about how stressed she was with all the gala prep. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from a friend of mine who worked in the membership office at the club. Incoming. I looked up, across the room. I saw Sloane's phone light up on the table in front of her. She ignored it for a moment, finishing her laugh, then casually reached out to flip it over. I watched her face. I saw the moment the pixels registered on her retinas. I saw the color drain from her skin, starting at her neck and washing up to her hairline. The smile didn't just fade, it disintegrated. The text she had just received was a courtesy notification from the club's general manager, likely tipped off by the sudden scrutiny from the gala committee. It would have said something polite, bureaucratic, and absolutely devastating. Dear Mrs. Hawley, regarding the pending review of your husband's sponsorship pledge and membership standing. Sloane stood up. She did it so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor, silencing the conversations around her. She looked at her phone, then looked around the room, her eyes wild. She looked like a person who had just realized the floor was made of paper. She didn't see me. She was too busy looking for an exit. She grabbed her bag, forgetting her sunglasses on the table, and practically ran toward the door. Her friends called after her, confused, asking if she was okay. She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. I watched her go. I watched the Queen of Potomac Crest flee the scene of her imaginary kingdom. I turned back to my donor, who was looking at me with interest. "Is everything all right?" he asked. I picked up my fork and took a bite of my salad. "Yes," I said. "Everything is perfectly fine. The system is just correcting itself." The deadline for the cash deposit was 24 hours away. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in her life, Sloane couldn't charm her way out of the countdown. The night of the Spring Sovereign Gala arrived with the force of a tidal wave disguised as a cocktail party. The grand ballroom of the Potomac Crest Country Club had been transformed. What was usually a cavernous space for weddings and golf awards was now a cathedral of light and influence. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling, suspended on invisible wires so they looked like floating clouds. The air smelled of expensive perfume, beeswax, and the specific, metallic scent of flashbulbs popping in rapid succession. A string quartet played in the corner, but the music was barely audible over the roar of 500 of the most powerful people in Washington, D.C., greeting one another. This was the world Sloane had dreamed of since she was old enough to read a society page. This was the arena she believed she was born to rule. I watched her arrival from the mezzanine. I had been there for an hour already, briefed by the security team and the protocol officers. I stood in the shadows of the upper balcony, looking down as my sister and her husband walked the red carpet. Sloane was wearing a gold dress. It was magnificent in a loud, aggressive way. It was covered in thousands of sequins that caught the light like shrapnel. She walked with her chin high, a practiced smile plastered on her face, acting the part of the benevolent hostess. She waved at people she barely knew. She squeezed the arms of women she secretly despised. She was performing the role of Mrs. Miles Hawley with every ounce of energy she possessed. But I knew her better than anyone, from my vantage point. I could see the cracks in the porcelain. Her eyes were not smiling. They were darting frantically left and right, scanning the room like a radar system. She was not looking for friends. She was looking for me. She was looking for the disaster she felt coming. Miles walked beside her, but he looked less like a husband and more like a man walking to the gallows. His tuxedo was impeccable, but his skin had a gray, clammy sheen to it. He kept checking his phone, slipping it in and out of his pocket, likely checking to see if the funds he had scrambled to move around had cleared, or if the email from the ethics committee had arrived. He was a man walking on a tightrope made of dental floss. I checked my own watch. It was 1800 hours. Time to descend. I had chosen a dress that was the antithesis of Sloane's gold armor. It was black, absolute, matte black velvet. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a back that plunged deep. It was architectural. It was serious. It did not scream for attention. It commanded silence. I wore no jewelry except for a small pin on my left shoulder, the insignia of the Royal Educational Initiative. I walked down the grand staircase. I did not rush. I moved with the steady, unhurried pace of a woman who knows exactly where she is going. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted. It was not because they recognized me, but because I was flanked by two men in earpieces. Sloane saw me first. I saw her body stiffen. She nudged Miles, hard, in the ribs. He looked up, and for a second, I saw raw panic in his eyes. They were standing near the entrance to the VIP cocktail area, holding their champagne glasses like shields. I walked toward them. I did not stop to chat. I simply nodded as I passed. "Sloane, Miles," I said. My voice was calm. "Wendy," Sloane breathed. She looked at my dress. She looked at the pin. She looked at the security detail. "You? You came." "I am working, Sloane," I said. "Enjoy the evening." I kept walking. I did not linger to let her inspect my hemline or critique my hair. I had somewhere to be. Moments later, the energy in the room shifted. It was a physical change, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and a hush fell over the crowd. The royal delegation had arrived. It was a motorcade of bodies. First came the diplomatic security, sharp and terrifyingly efficient. Then came the aides. And finally, Her Royal Highness and the ambassador. The room, filled with CEOs and senators who usually demanded attention, fell silent. They craned their necks. They stood on tiptoes. This was the true power. This was the level of influence that money could not buy. I stood near the entrance of the private reception room, waiting. The protocol officer, a tall man with a British accent that could cut glass, stepped forward. He held a tablet. He looked at the delegation. Then he looked at me. "Your Highness," the officer said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "May I present the Honorable Wendy Rodriguez, architect of the Global Literacy Initiative and tonight's keynote speaker." The title rang out like a bell. The Honorable. I saw Sloane's face from 10 feet away. She was close enough to hear it. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked around to see if anyone else had heard. "Did he just bow to her?" A woman standing next to Sloane whispered. "I think he did," another woman replied. "Wait, is that your sister? Sloane? I thought you said she ran a daycare." Sloane did not answer. She turned pale. She watched as Her Royal Highness extended a hand to me, not a formal handshake, but a warm, two-handed grasp of familiarity. "Wendy," the princess said, smiling. "It is wonderful to see you again. I was just reading your report on the Brazilian pilot program. Truly remarkable work." "Thank you, ma'am," I said, curtsying deeply. "We are very proud of the team." "Come," she said, gesturing to the private room. "We have much to discuss before dinner." I turned and followed the delegation into the private reception area, as the heavy velvet ropes were drawn back to let us in. I saw Miles make his move. He saw the ambassador. He saw Jonathan Kress, the CEO of Ardent Tech, walking just behind the royals. This was the moment he had sold to his clients. This was the access he had leveraged my parents' house to secure. Miles lunged forward, his hand extended, a desperate smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Kress," Miles called out, stepping toward the velvet rope. "Jonathan Miles Hawley. We exchanged emails about the—" He never finished the sentence. A coordination officer, a woman with a clipboard and eyes like flint, stepped directly in his path. She did not touch him, but she occupied the space so completely that he was forced to stop. "Excuse me, sir," she said. Her voice was polite but loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "I just need a quick word with Mr. Kress," Miles stammered, trying to look around her. "I am a platinum member. My wife is right there." "I apologize, Mr. Hawley," the officer said, consulting her list. "This area is restricted to the official delegation and honorees only. Your clearance does not extend beyond the main ballroom." "But I sponsored a table," Miles argued, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "We appreciate your support," she said, cutting him off. "Please return to your seat. Dinner is about to be served." She turned her back on him. Miles was left standing there, his hands still half extended, staring at the closed door of the room where I was currently drinking tea with the people he had promised to deliver. I saw Gregory Salinger, the client Miles had emailed, watching the entire exchange with a look of cold disgust. Miles retreated to Sloane's side. They looked at each other. For the first time, they looked small. An hour later, the main program began. The ballroom was seated. The lights were dimmed, leaving only the spotlights on the stage. I sat at the head table, to the right of the princess. My family was seated at table 12, a platinum table that was conspicuously far from the stage, likely a result of the committee's last-minute review of their standing. The master of ceremonies took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we celebrate the power of education to transform nations. We have many generous donors in the room, and we thank you. But money is only the fuel. It requires a visionary to build the engine. He paused. Our keynote speaker tonight is a woman who has spent the last 15 years building that engine. She has negotiated with 14 foreign governments. She manages a portfolio of $40 million in direct aid. She has overseen the construction of 300 digital classrooms in the most remote corners of the globe. I looked at table 12. My mother was staring at the stage, her hand covering her mouth. My father had taken off his glasses and was cleaning them, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Sloan was frozen, staring at the giant screen behind the stage where my official bio was being projected. Wendy Rodriguez, CEO, Global Impact Award winner, United Nations liaison. They were reading the resume I had tried to tell them about for years. They were hearing the numbers I had tried to share at Thanksgiving dinners, only to be interrupted by talk of patio furniture. Please welcome, the MC boomed, the Honorable Wendy Rodriguez. The room erupted. I stood up. I walked to the podium. The light was blinding, but I felt incredibly calm. I placed my notes on the stand, but I didn't look at them. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Miles. He was staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He had convinced himself that I was a fraud, that I was exaggerating. Now, faced with the undeniable reality of my standing, his entire worldview was collapsing. I began to speak. Thank you, Your Highness, distinguished guests, I said. My voice was steady. We often talk about legacy in rooms like this. We talk about what we leave behind. We put our names on buildings. We put our names on trusts. We strive to carve our identity into stone so that we will not be forgotten. I let the silence hang for a moment. But the true legacy of leadership is not in the name you buy, I said, looking directly at table 12. It is in the doors you open for others. It is in the quiet, unglamorous work of laying a foundation that others will walk on long after you are gone. I didn't mention my family. I didn't tell a story about a sister who bullied me or a brother-in-law who committed fraud. I didn't need to. The contrast was the revenge. I have learned that integrity is the only currency that does not devalue. I continued. You can fake success. You can rent a lifestyle, but you cannot fake impact. When the lights go down and the applause stops, the only thing that remains is what you have truly built with your own hands. I spoke for 20 minutes. I spoke about the children in Jakarta. I spoke about the teachers in rural Peru. I spoke about the responsibility of privilege. When I finished, I stepped back from the podium. For a second, there was silence. Then, Jonathan Kress stood up. Then the princess stood up. And then, 500 people rose to their feet. The applause was a physical wave. It washed over me, warm and validating. I looked down at my family. My father was clapping. He was clapping slowly, rhythmically, with tears streaming down his face. It was the first time he had ever looked at me with pride, but it was a pride mixed with the bitter realization of how much he had missed. My mother was sobbing openly, clutching her napkin, and Sloan was standing, but she wasn't clapping. Her hands were at her sides. She was crying, but they were not the pretty cinematic tears she usually cried. Her face was crumpled. She was looking at me, up on that stage, bathed in light, and she was realizing that the shadow she had tried to cast over me had only served to hide her own darkness. She looked terrified. She looked like she knew, deep down, that the check was coming due. I walked off the stage. I shook hands with the princess. I felt a sense of completion. I had done it. I had proven them wrong without saying a word to them, but the night was not over. As the house lights came up for the dessert service, I saw movement near table 12. 2 men in dark suits walked over to the table. They were not waiters. They were not guests. They wore the distinct, somber expressions of legal compliance officers. One of them leaned down and tapped Miles on the shoulder. Miles jumped as if he had been electrocuted. He looked up. The man whispered something in his ear. Miles shook his head violently, pointing at the stage, pointing at me, trying to argue. The second man moved to Sloane's side. He spoke to her softly. Sloane looked at Miles. Then she looked at the man. She stood up. her legs shaking so badly she had to grab the table for support. The room was loud with chatter. So few people noticed, but I noticed. I watched as the two officers escorted Miles and Sloane away from their platinum table. They were not being arrested, not yet, but they were being removed. They were being walked past the other tables, past the friends they had bragged to, past the clients Miles had tried to impress. They were being led toward the administrative offices. I took a sip of water. The gala was beautiful. The orchids were perfect. And as the doors closed behind my sister and her husband, I knew that the conversation waiting for them in that room would be about a lot more than a missed payment. It was about the end of the illusion. The room they escorted us into was not designed for parties. It was the boardroom of the Membership and Ethics Committee, a space of dark mahogany, heavy curtains, and an air conditioning system set to a temperature that felt distinctly like a morgue. The sounds of the gala, the laughter, the clinking of crystal, the string quartet were instantly severed as the heavy soundproof door clicked shut behind us. I stood near the door. Miles and Sloane were seated on the opposite side of the long table. They looked like two children who had been called to the principal's office. Except the stakes here were not detention. The stakes were their entire social existence. Mrs. Calloway sat at the head of the table. Julian Vance stood beside her. There was no tea service. There were no smiles. Mr. and Mrs. Hawley. Mrs. Calloway began, her voice crisp and dry. We have removed you from the floor because a serious compliance matter has been brought to our attention, a matter that requires immediate resolution before this evening proceeds any further. Miles straightened his tie, attempting to summon the arrogance that had carried him this far. This is ridiculous, he said, though his voice cracked slightly. I am a platinum sponsor. You cannot just drag me away from my guests. Do you know who I was about to speak to Jonathan Kress? We know exactly who you were trying to speak to, Mrs. Calloway said, and that is part of the problem. She opened a folder in front of her. Mr. Hawley, your admission to Potomac Crest and your sponsorship of this gala were predicated on a pledge of $500,000 to our charitable endowment. That pledge was secured against the assets of the Hawley Bennett Family Trust. The funds are in transit, Miles lied quickly. It is a banking delay. I told you this. The funds are not in transit, Mrs. Calloway corrected him, because the trust effectively does not exist. Our auditors have determined that the entity is a shell. Furthermore, the name you chose, Hawley Bennett, appears to be a deliberate attempt to mimic the established Bennett Foundation to bypass our vetting algorithms. In our bylaws, this is classified as passing off. It is a form of fraud. Sloane turned to look at her husband. Her face was a mask of horror. Miles, you told me the trust was set up by your firm. Miles ignored her. He was looking at me. She put you up to this, he spat, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. This is a vendetta. My sister-in-law is jealous, so she is feeding you lies to sabotage me. Julian Vance stepped forward. He held a tablet in his hand. That brings us to the second matter, Julian said. His British accent was devoid of warmth. 3 weeks ago, the committee received an anonymous tip claiming that Ms. Rodriguez had falsified her credentials. It was a serious accusation. It triggered a security review that could have embarrassed the royal delegation. Exactly, Miles said, seizing on this. See, people know she is a fraud. We traced the digital footprint of that tip, Julian continued, ignoring the outburst. It was sent from a device connected to the Potomac Crest Guest Network. Specifically, it was sent from a device registered to you, Mr. Hawley, and it was forwarded through your corporate server. The room went silent. Sloane let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She pulled her hand away from Miles's arm as if he were burning hot. She understood instantly what had happened. The dirty trick Miles had used to try and destroy me was now the smoking gun that proved his own lack of integrity. You flagged your own family as a security risk, Mrs. Calloway said, looking at Miles with open disdain. In doing so, you forced us to investigate. And when we investigated Ms. Rodriguez, we found nothing but excellence. But when we looked closer at the source of the complaint, we found the irregularities in your pledge. She closed the folder. You brought this scrutiny on yourself. Mr. Hawley, you invited us to look, and we did. Miles slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked small, sweaty, and utterly defeated. I can fix it, he whispered. I can get the money. Just give me a week. Please, do not do this tonight. I stepped forward. I had not spoken a word until this moment. I walked to the table and placed a thin black folder on the polished wood. He cannot fix it, I said calmly. Wendy, please, Sloane begged, tears streaming down her face. Don't. I am not doing anything, Sloane, I said. I am just finishing the paperwork. I opened the folder. Inside were the emails Miles had sent to Gregory Salinger and other clients. The emails where he promised access to Jonathan Kress and the royal delegation in exchange for business deals. The committee needs to see this, I said to Mrs. Calloway. Mr. Hawley has been selling access to this gala to his clients. He promised introductions he had no authority to make. He was turning a philanthropic event into a trade show. Mrs. Calloway scanned the emails. Her expression hardened into stone. Commercial solicitation at the gala was the cardinal sin. It was the one thing that was absolutely unforgivable. This is a violation of the sanctity of the sovereign gala, Mrs. Calloway said, and it poses a direct liability to our relationship with Ardent Tech. She looked up at the two security officers standing in the corner. Mr. Miles Hawley, Mrs. Sloane Hawley, she announced formally, your probationary membership is hereby suspended, effective immediately. Pending a full legal review, your sponsorship pledge is voided. You are barred from all future club events. Suspended, Sloane whispered. But my friends are out there. My parents are out there. You will be escorted to the side exit, Mrs. Calloway said. Your coats have already been retrieved. Your vehicle is waiting. No. Miles stood up. You cannot do this. I paid $25,000 for that table. I want a refund. I will sue you. The bylaws state that fees are forfeited in cases of ethical breach, Mrs. Calloway said. Bored. You are welcome to sue. Our legal team is excellent. I suggest you save your money for your own defense. The security guards moved forward. One of them took Miles by the elbow. Sloane sat frozen. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak. She had spent her life trying to get into this room, and now she was being thrown out of it because the man she married had tried to cheat the system. Wendy, she said, her voice shaking. How could you? We are sisters. I know, I said. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the last time as the person she used to be. You are asking the wrong question, Sloane, I said softly. You think you lost tonight because I am powerful. You think I outplayed you. I shook my head. You did not lose because I am good. Sloane, you lost because you chose to make me small. You were so obsessed with keeping me beneath you that you anchored yourself to a sinking ship just to hold me down. Sloane stared at me. The truth of it hit her. If she had just been happy for me, if she had just supported me, none of this would have happened. She would still be sitting at the platinum table. She would still have her membership. Her envy was the architect of her own exile. Goodbye, Sloane, I said. I turned my back on them. I heard the door open. I heard Miles shouting something incoherent about his lawyers. I heard the click of Sloane's heels as she was led away. Not to the red carpet, but to the service elevator. I walked back into the hallway. Julian Vance was waiting for me. Ms. Rodriguez, he said respectfully. We are ready for the closing remarks. The princess has requested that you announce the new initiative. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the velvet of my dress. I was not shaking. I felt solid. I felt real. I walked back into the ballroom. The atmosphere was electric. The dessert had been served. The air was sweet with chocolate and triumph. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit me, warm and blinding. I leaned into the microphone. Distinguished guests, I said, tonight has been a celebration of what we can achieve. but achievement means nothing without a foundation of truth. I looked out at the audience. I saw my parents at table 12. They were sitting alone now. The 2 chairs where Miles and Sloane had sat were empty, glaringly vacant. My mother was holding a handkerchief to her face. My father was looking down at his hands. They knew. They had seen the security guards. They realized that the glamour they had worshipped was a lie, and the daughter they had ignored was the only thing real in the room. I am honored to announce a new partnership, I continued. Tonight, with the support of the royal delegation, we are launching the Sovereign Path Scholarship. I paused. This fund is dedicated to transparency, I said, choosing the word carefully. It is for students who have nothing but their integrity and their hard work. It is a promise that in this world, you do not need to buy your way in. You do not need to fake your way to the top. If you do the work, if you honor your commitments, the door will open. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. I looked at my parents one last time. My mother was crying. But these were not the tears of a socialite. They were the tears of a mother who realized she had backed the wrong child. My father lifted his head and looked at me. He nodded. It was a small, humble gesture, a bow of surrender to the truth. I finished my speech. I walked off the stage. I did not go back to table 12. I did not go to comfort them. I had paid my debts. I had cleared my ledger. I walked straight to the exit. The valet was waiting with my car. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I reached into my purse. I pulled out the heavy cream-colored envelope with the royal seal, the invitation that had started it all. I didn't need it anymore. I had the memory. I had the victory. I looked at the moon hanging over the golf course. Somewhere, in a car driving away from this place, Miles and Sloane were screaming at each other. Somewhere, my parents were sitting in the wreckage of their expectations, but I was here, standing on my own 2 feet. I got into my car and drove away, leaving the lights of the country club fading in my rearview mirror, a beautiful, glowing stage set for a play I no longer needed to be in. Thank you so much for listening to my story on Jane Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your location in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay strong, and always keep your receipts.